So about 10 years ago, I joined an institution called the CSIR, the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. And in my role within that particular organization, I became what they call an industrial researcher. So an industrial researcher investigates existing economic industries, and they investigate how to make those industries thrive or how they could help them grow. So when someone comes with a new invention and that invention could expand and grow an industry, they would then come to someone like me as an industrial researcher to find out the viability of those ideas and whether those ideas can then translate into economic reforms. And for South Africa, in an economy that needs to create jobs, that work became very important. And the auto industry has always been one of those industries where you could create jobs if you innovate the right way, or if you create the right type of supply chain and create the right type of entrepreneurial linkages to grow an economy. It has value addition, which then adds to a thriving economy. So by virtue of having worked on industrial development and the auto industry being a big industry in South Africa's context, it was a natural progression to move from that role in the CSIR into naamsa, which is where I am today. So in South Africa, you have to look at our economy as what they call a post-industrial economy. What that means is that we get a lot of value in the economy from services. And for an economy to progress naturally, you need to move from, say, mining and agriculture, which are primary sectors, and then you move into an industrial economy, then you move into this post-industrial economy. And a post-industrial economy generally would require a very high-skilled population because it's services. That's why banking is such a big sector in South Africa, retail and related services sector. But South Africa moved into this post-industrial economy prematurely without firstly mastering an industrial sector. And for that reason, auto industry and South Africa having the ability to have an auto industry has provided an opportunity for us to almost backtrack and create full value. And the auto industry in South Africa is the biggest value adder. So because we have a supply chain with local suppliers that are creating even their own supply chain at tier 2 and tier 3 level. There's case studies like in the catalytic converter where you could show that we've benefited raw materials that are mined locally, especially in the PGMs, and we've been able to create a product or something very substantive as an economy out of the raw materials that we have in our country. So the auto industry really balances out a lot of what we got wrong to being prematurely a post-industrial economy. The industrial economy itself is still quite small. It's about 13% of GDP. It could be more if we figure out how we still use automotive industry as a catalytic sector to get other elements of manufacturing happening in the economy. So for that reason, we are an economy that cannot do without fully maximizing on the automotive industry and its success. So there's two elements that we have to consider as an industry. One is how well do we sell the cars that we make, and the cars that we make could either sell in the domestic market or we could sell in the export market. And our very closest adjacent export market is the region, the African continent. And so our goal has always been to sell as many cars as possible to our local market that we make naturally from South Africa. Currently, the challenge with that is that we've got a local market that has an influx of imports that has created an imbalance. So instead of selling 50% to the local market from cars that we make locally, we're only selling 33%. And the reason for that is that our cars have lost competitiveness. A car that you buy in South Africa currently would be in the region of between 10 and 30% more expensive than a car that you would import. And so what we have as a challenge now is that we're making cars that otherwise might not necessarily be competitive in the domestic market, and it would allow imports to then thrive. Now, that said, you should also should be cognizant of the idea that out of every 1,000 people in South Africa, only about 200 people own cars. We do believe that that number could double. More people could be owning cars. And should that increase in ownership be import driven, that growth will not necessarily be driving industrial development. And so what we're trying to do is to restore competitiveness in the cars that we make in local, to make sure that those cars then find an equal footing in the domestic market with those that we are importing. And then in the African market, the biggest challenge there is that a lot of cars that we have in the region are imported second-hand vehicles. And so what we now need to create is that we need to create a regional presence for the cars that we make locally and we need the region itself to acknowledge that we cannot continue to be a dumping site for these second-hand vehicles that are coming from Asia that are taking away this potential industrial development. If we sort out that demand question, a lot of the other things that we're struggling with, including how we create local value addition, create more jobs, those then will fall in place, and we figure out a way to then increase the industry, double our production, ensure that we double our employment, and ensure that our industry continues to be fully proofed for the future. And obviously, one other one that I could say it's a challenge is that 80% of the cars that we manufacture, we send to the UK and the EU. And in those markets, they now have green laws, and some of the cars that we're making, we know from 2030 they will stop buying. So how well do we then immunize or safeguard our industry against that eventual market development becomes a new challenge that we also need to solve for at this stage. So the transformation in the automotive industry has got a North Star to it, and our North Star is in SAAM 35. And SAAM 35 espouses the following idea. It espouses the idea that if we have a thriving supply chain within the auto industry, that supply chain could get to a place where we've got black industrialists, so black-owned companies that can give input up to 25% in the vehicles that we're producing as a country. And because of that, it means now we need to figure out, one, how do we create opportunities for more suppliers? And within that supply base that we're trying to grow, how do we attract black manufacturers that will then have the right configuration of tooling, the right configuration of skills, and the right configuration of quality standards to supply into the auto value chain. And if we are able to do that and thrive in doing that, and whether this is through a transformation fund or this is through a skills development intervention or through collaborations with some of our OEMs, if we are able to create an ecosystem where a black supplier will get to a place where they're able to provide 25% of value addition in the vehicles that we're doing as a country, we would have achieved transformation. I think I love that particular idea that is espoused there, because I think if PE is a measure of transformation, it's achievable, and there are many ways to achieve it, but meaningful transformation for the auto industry is really how well we create and that emergence of this black industrialist that's going to supply 25% into the cars that we produce as a nation. So the APDP is a support program by government designed in alignment with the World Trade Organization requirements to protecting infant industries. So the automotive industry, as significant as we view it to be in South Africa, as old as it has been, which is 102 years old, is still an infant industry. So we still are not producing vehicles at a right tier for us to fully be embraced as a tier 1, tier 2 vehicle producing country. For that, we need to be producing in the region of about 900,000 units, which is 1% of global production. So in order for us to achieve those type of ambitions, government came up with a program that, one, acknowledges that our raw materials are sourced from markets that are too far from us as a country. We source our products from EU, from markets such as China, and we bring some of those products locally. Some of those particular input components we source from our own local industries, and then we send our cars on a 7-day boat ride to Europe, because that's where our primary market is. So if you consider the time it takes for us to receive some of our raw material and the time it takes for a complete product to reach the market at the destinations where it needs to be, you'd realize it should be expensive for South Africa to be making cars. So in order for us, for the country to keep the industry thriving and ease the way we do business, they came with a program called APDP, which would then make it easy for us to continue making cars and to become an industry that's growing. And we could then have an ambition to reach 900,000 units, which is currently our installed capacity if you take all our factories. Now, why do we need to have reforms? In order for any system to work, it needs to be adaptable to changing global situations. Just 2 years or 3 years ago, one of our third biggest destiny for our export product was the US. But the US would then overnight change their trade laws and they would impose tariffs on us, and all of a sudden we lose that market. So we need to make adjustments. Or we did not have a local market that is thriving on the back of a growing import population, for instance. And how then do we rebalance policies in order for both our own locally produced vehicles to thrive in the same market with the imports that are now in the market. And so there's always a need to tinker and change policy in order for that competitiveness for the products that we make locally to remain stable. Now, the danger as well is that when you talk about tinkering with policy, especially a trade policy, generally the two ways that come up is a countervailing measure or protecting an industry. So protecting an infant industry, like I said, means that you create favorable policies that will get the industry to find its feet and to also continue to thrive. But a countervailing measure assumes that the flow of imports into your local market could have a damaging effect. And if they have a damaging effect, so if there's evidence of job losses that created by the fact that your trade partners are flooding your market, and so therefore your reaction requires a different type of posture for that market to remain protected and to remain thriving. Then you then have a countervailing measure that you could pull in to protect your local market. And this countervailing measure ends up being tariff adjustments, ends up being things like those. So whilst NAMSA does not believe we are at a place where our countervailing measures should be based on trade tariffs, rather than it should be based on how well we protect vectors of production and how well we fully reconfigure how AIS is structured and how AIS supports capitalization of industry, and we begin to invest in technologies of the future to continue to have a structure or an industry that's technologically relevant, and we're still making cars at an efficient and competitive level so that we remain relevant to global vehicle production. And so reforms are a necessary lever that we need to have in the economy, but the conversations themselves are too nuanced to assume that any proposals are relevant without testing them. And so we are at this time in the history of our automotive industry, 102 years down the line, at a place where we are reviewing policy and we're trying to figure out a best gliding path for automotive policy for the country. In socioeconomics, we speak of a window that's called Overton window of possibility. And that theory suggests that in any given time, political will is willing to focus on one thing at a time. And if political will has got its focus on something, changes happen. Some people would say that perhaps the political will in South Africa is now focused on the Madlanga Commission, and everyone is looking at Madlanga Commission as this way that we could offset corruption in our political existence in South Africa. However, at an industrial level, there is a political will that's willing to look at the necessary adjustments required by the automotive industry to be future-proofed and to make it into the next 10 years. And whilst no one can predict what's going to happen next, and the future is not necessarily predictable, I can tell you now that I can appreciate that everyone who's important in the conversation is discussing what can be done next. And so I think we are in the right Overton window to make the right decisions for the future of our industry.